Want to welcome everyone here today. My name is Dwayne Cave, and I'm the chair of the Community Relations Citizens Advisory Committee, and it's my privilege to welcome you to our February 21st, 2018 meeting. Thank you very much for being here. This time we'd like to start with the Pledge of Allegiance. I'd like to ask our President, Don Froelich, if he could please lead us in the pledge.
Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to our great country. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, thank you very much. First, I want to start by thanking everyone for attending the meeting today. You know, many people are critical of government, but few take the time and effort to get involved, and by being here today, you're showing that you are involved with your local government. Thank you for participating, taking action to represent our community, and learn more about the many important issues that are surrounding water. Your involvement makes government better, more responsible, and ultimately holds us accountable. As a director, I'm always grateful when I hear directly from our customers and our residents about their priorities and their views. And this group does a great job about telling us what their views are. Our customers have some of the best ideas for ways that we can do our jobs better, and the CAC has been a great conduit for that. On that note, before we proceed on the agenda, I want to ask, do we have any public comment? Well, and John, we're going to have something for you in a second. And you know what? And quite honestly, during this presentation today, to let you know, we have a great panel that's going to speak today. And then as soon as they're done, a lot of time for questions and answers. So if you have some questions, definitely write down what you have. And so at this time, are there any just general public comments? Then we'd like to do approval of the minutes, and it's for board action. Do I have a motion to approve?
Approval of the minutes of the June 7, 2017 Community Relations Citizens Advisory Committee Board of Directors meeting.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Director Fiore, a second by Director Colton. All those in favor, say aye.
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 I'm not in favor. I was
So you're going to abstain? Okay. So in that case, we have 6 ayes and 1 abstain. Thank you very much. Next, we're going to move on to presentation items. And Matt, are you going to start this off for our presentation?
Sure. Good morning. Just wanted to make everybody aware of a handful of events that we have coming up. We're really excited about a few of these things. First off, some of you may have already received an invitation. We have our open house for our Operations Center Consolidation Improvement Project. Our Operations Center, where we're at right now, it's often commonly referred to as Plant 2A. We're working on a project to consolidate all of our operations from our main office and our operations folks here into some new facilities. We have an open house to kind of present some more information on the project. It's this Saturday from 10 to 2 right here at this location. So it's an open house. Feel free to come at any time during that time frame. We'd love to have you. It shouldn't take long. There'll be tours available and some more information about the project. So 10 to 2 this Saturday. On March 22nd, it's a Thursday evening from 5 to 7 at the district's main office, we will be hosting a Fix a Leak workshop. It's an opportunity to come in and find out how you can find and fix some of the common household leaks that you might have within your own home. So you'll see some promotional opportunities for that going out here soon, and hopefully if you're available, you can come in and learn how to find and fix some leaks around your house. Lastly, on April 26th from 8 to noon at the City Hall in Laguna Niguel, we will be in partnership with several other cities and regional agencies hosting an H2O for HOAs event. And this is an opportunity for HOA property managers, HOA board members, or HOA landscapers to come in and learn a little bit more about the programs, water efficiency related rebate opportunities in different areas where HOAs can find ways to save water and save money as well. So that's on Thursday, April 26th from 8 to noon. So hopefully we can see some of you at 1 or 2 or all of these events. We're excited to have them coming forward.
Okay, And do we have an update for the TAP initiative from John?
We do have an update from the TAP initiative, and I think John Ulrich's going to come up and provide that update for
Okay,
us.
thank you.
Good morning. My name's John Ulrich. I'm on the advisory group and also TAP advisory, which has been my pleasure, obviously. They're doing a great job getting the message out to the community compared to a year ago. It's awesome. So some of the things that are going on, we learned about the district's new Team Molten Water Cam channel on YouTube. Those of you who haven't gone on to it, there's 21 videos of every description. Drew and June are almost movie stars now, getting out there and talking about these things, and the whole staff. So it's pretty amazing. The materials that Molten Water has out there, like a lot of you go to community events, fundraisers, they're out there in a booth with all these materials doing face-to-face interaction, which is always the best way to get the message out. Howard, is Howard over here, he's getting involved with how we get involved with the HOAs, and we all know, like I'm president of my HOA, the water bill is always a point of discussion. So we're going to have a workshop put on by the district in April to different cities, so that's pretty cool. And also, finally, we all know that our youngsters, young adults, the importance of education and finding ways to work with these folks. We're having a Coast Keeper field trips that'll demonstrate how, the water our yards and how important it is for water to flow into our creeks and rivers. So that's the update. We're making great progress, thanks to everybody here. I look forward to our presentation on WaterFix. Thanks.
Thank you very much, John. Appreciate it. And again, the YouTube channel, great thing. Go to Molten Nagel YouTube channel. It's not just June and Drew that are movie stars, but I'll tell you what, Paige, our own Paige, does an outstanding job, and you have to see that. So at this time, I'm going to transition over to the podium for our talk today. Okay, all utilities, water included, provides essential public services that we often take for granted. Water is the most consequential public policy issue, and consequently, your water agency directly affects your day-to-day life of our residents. At Molten, we're lucky to have a board and staff that deeply committed to providing a reliable source of clean drinking water and recycled water to meet our community needs. And in the spirit of the district's TAP initiative, which John just talked about, we want to include you in the conversation about these important issues. We do not intend to fly below the radar. We want to be out in front and invite you to lead us in finding innovative ways to be reliable and faithful stewards of the public services, including the state's water and public funds. Running out of water is really a big problem. We've gone through many years of the drought. And even in advanced economies, we see that there's issues. Look at Cape Town, South Florida, South Africa right now. We're seeing that in Cape Town, the second most populated and urban area in South Africa, a major metropolitan city considered a vibrant regional economy hub, is now just a few weeks away from day zero. The moment when Cape Town may run dry, according to USA, is early June. According to CNN, residents will be forced to line up on the streets at water stations where they will be restricted to rationing of 6.6 gallons per person per day. Our indoor budget at Molten Nagel is 55 gallons a day for indoor use, and if you look what do our customers use, they average about 50 gallons a day. But right now, Cape Town is under severe water restrictions with residents limited to about 13 gallons per day. Put these numbers into perspective, the average American uses about 17 gallons for an 8-minute shower. Cape Town, on the OC Register editorial, they said that Cape Town should concern all of us here in California. We share a similar climate and face the same risk of drought. Earlier this month, the Orange County Register wrote that Southern California needs to use this cautionary tale to get real about our present and coming dilemma. So, with the return of drought conditions, we must renew our commitment to a public discussion on water. That's why we're here today. Drought conditions are back according to the latest report from the U.S. Drought Monitor, and approximately 3/4 of the state has experienced at least abnormally dry conditions, with more than 43.7% in the midst of moderate drought. More than 24 million Californians are once again living through a drought zone. That means that we need to get prepared, taking both the short-term steps to be water efficient and long-term steps to invest in more reliable water supplies. Today, our distinguished panel will provide some expert analysis on the latter issue, long-term water reliability, focusing on one important project in particular. The WaterFix project is one proposal intended to address water reliability in California. The project, as proposed, would install two 40-foot diameter tunnels 150 feet underground, which would draw water from the Sacramento River north of the Delta and convey it south for delivery without harm to fragile species. The tunnels would capture water that otherwise would flow to the ocean during the storm events that occur when the pumps are shut off to protect the fish. The project is estimated to cost about $17 billion. Supporters of the California WaterFix plan to deliver a more reliable water supply. And Lucy Dunn, president of the Orange County Business Council, wrote that the California WaterFix protects the natural flows in the Delta, promises a more reliable water supply, and improved conditions for fish and wildlife. Critics of the California WaterFix, including the Orange County Register, say that the cost of the water project fall on way too few people. The Register writes, with no federal money and some water districts in the state declining to participate, the cost of the WaterFix would fall on a smaller pool of ratepayers already burdened by water costs. So today, we've assembled an all-star panel. Look at them. All-star panel that will explain more about the project and offer some thoughtful analysis on our long-term reliability issues. And our goal is to help educate and inform our customers about these big ideas and address our water infrastructure. We'll have comments from our panelists and then provide time at the end for your questions. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Stephen Arakawa. And so Stephen Arakawa is the manager of the Bay Delta Initiative Program at the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. He has a background of 30 years working in the water field as an engineer. At Metropolitan, he's responsible for the plans and activities to secure water supply from the State Water Project through environmental and water supply improvements in the Sacramento, San Joaquin River Delta. Before coming to Metropolitan in 1987, Stephen worked for the California Department of Water Resources in Sacramento for 7 years. Stephen Arakawa, and then after that, I'll introduce the other panelists.
Thank you, Chairman Cave. I really appreciate having the opportunity to be here this morning and to update you on what I feel is a real important point in time as far as the state's water resources and how Southern California fits into that. So with regard to the all-star panel, I'm the first one, and I know in the Olympics they talk about like the first person out of the gate, whether it's the downhill skiing or the ice skating or whatever, the first one out has a lot of pressure on them. And I'm going to try to really bring to life what is really going on. And then obviously I think we can't go through all of it, but with the question and answers that are going to come later, hopefully you go away with a better understanding of where the project is and why it's important. Think of the state's water supply serving close to 25, 26 million people. And in Southern California, Metropolitan Water District serves about 19 million people. So the water resources from the state of California through the State Water Project are vitally important to the economy. For Southern California and for Metropolitan, we're talking about 6 counties, all the way from Ventura down to San Diego, LA, Orange County, Riverside, San Bernardino. And Metropolitan was formed to help finance the Colorado River Aqueduct. And a number of agencies got together back in 1928 to do that. Southern California and the service area that Metropolitan serves represents about $1 trillion, or about half of the state's economy. And so even though geographically, if you look at the colored areas down there, it's certainly not half of the state, but in terms of economy and in terms of population, the water that's served to this region through Metropolitan Water District is pretty important from a big picture standpoint, not only statewide, but nationally as well. Metropolitan gets 30% of its water from the State Water Project. So that's the State Water Project that when you're driving down I-5 from going north to south or south to north, you see it along the way, the aqueduct system, or if you're flying, you can see it from the air. And it's a pretty amazing system going 444 miles. It starts all the way up in the watershed, up in the Oroville area, and rainfall and snowpack runs off and goes to the Sacramento, Feather River and Sacramento River. And all of that water collects in what's called the Delta area, the Delta region. So there's a triangle there, the blue area, that represents the Delta. And so our region counts on 30% of its water from this source, the State Water Project. 25% of its water, of the region's water, comes from the Colorado River Aqueduct, which was built in the 1930s and 40s. And then our local supply comes, 45% comes from our local supply, and that's a growing figure because as we go into the future, our supply is going to be met by water recycling, seawater desalination, maybe certainly brackish desalination, and more stormwater capture, and conservation to reduce demand. So Southern California, and in particular the region that we're in today, has been a leader in water conservation and reducing demand, and that's going to be key going into the future, particularly how water is used outdoors. That 45% is going to be how we meet, our economic needs going into the future, in addition to managing water. So when we talk about WaterFix and what the State Water Project needs to do to improve its reliability, it's really about creating reliable supplies. It's not to gain a lot of extra water compared to where we are today. It's to actually make the system more reliable than it is today, and I'm going to be talking about that. Improving the State Water Project also helps improve our local water supply, and I'll go into that as well. When looking at the whole region, like I said, going into the future to meet our future needs, water supply and conservation down here are going to be really key. And it's been the focus of our water supply strategies, or our water plans, going back to 1996. That is to diversify our supplies, to not just count on imported supplies, and to develop groundwater resources, groundwater treatment, to develop recycled water, desalting of water, and reducing demand. And reducing demand in the homes and in businesses, commercial areas, and outdoors. So as we go into the future, if you were to kind of look at where we've been versus where we want to be in about the year 2045, when we get to an average type of year, about 2/3 of our water supply will be a result of local actions, our local supply, recycled water, and all of the other sources that I talked about. And about 1/3 will be imported. And that's reverse of what we had back in the late 80s and early 90s, where 2/3 of our water was coming from imported supplies. So the region, Southern California, has dramatically changed its course on how we manage water, how we're looking to meet our needs out into the future. The reason that Cal WaterFix fits in is because the region has also invested significantly in a system that brings in a large volume of water that really logistically is challenging, or would be challenging and very difficult to replace. It's a significant volume of water. The quality of the water from the State Water Project is really key to blending with the Colorado River water. The Colorado River water is higher in salt content. So when blending the State Water Project and the Colorado water, that helps to make water recycling feasible. Without the State Water Project, water would be much more limited in terms of what kind of water recycling opportunities there would be in Southern California. So going into the future, the reliable supply of State Water Project water helps with increasing our local supply because of the salt content, but also because of the ability to refill our groundwater basins. So we use our groundwater basins, and in many basins, draw those basins down during drier times. You manage it that way to draw it down in drier times and then to fill it back up in wetter times. And so having the ability to store that water is really key. And the State Water Project during mid-hydrologic kind of years, the average type of years to the wetter years, provides the opportunity to fill storage. The other thing too is that in drought conditions, the water storage, both underground and in surface reservoirs, has been the key way in which we've weathered through some serious cutbacks due to drought, but also when the Colorado River Aqueduct was cut back in the early 2000s. We did go through allocations and rationing and such, but the real severe economic impact was avoided because we had storage reserves, and the State Water Project is really important for that, because in the hydrology of the state, it's usually wet or it's dry, and when it's wet, you try to fill up the storage. Last year was wet, this year is dry, and so you take advantage of those opportunities. The Delta area, though, it's just east of the San Francisco Bay, and that's where the water gets diverted into the aqueducts. There's two water projects, the State Water Project and the Federal Water Project. Southern California gets its water from the State Water Project. And the severe challenges that it faces are that sea level is rising. It has over the last 100 years, but the projections going forward are at an accelerated rate. So when the seawater rises, when the tide rises, that actually brings salt water in from the San Francisco Bay and ocean into the Delta system where our water is diverted. And so that affects the quality of the water and the usefulness of the water. The other thing is the Delta region was a natural estuary, but it was drained and diked for agriculture. And through many, many years of agricultural activity and practices, the land in the Delta has subsided, it's oxidized, such that the land surface in many of the core areas of the Delta, right in the center, where our water passes through in these earthen channels, the land surface is in some places 15, 20, 25 feet below sea level. So if those earthen dikes were to fail as a result of flooding or earthquake, but particularly earthquake, that would allow the tides to rush in, bringing in salt water, and really severely impact the ability to deliver water from the system and into the California aqueduct. So that subsidence is a big risk. Seismic, there are a number of faults, both that are apparent on the surface of the land, but also blind faults that are underneath the ground. And there's a risk of earthquake that will occur there in the next 20 years. The United States Geological Survey projects that a major earthquake will occur in the next 10 to 20 years there that could have a significant impact on those delta islands and those delta levees. And then the fishery declines, with fish being listed on the Endangered Species Act. That has affected the operation of the water projects to limit pumping during many times of the year, most times of the year. There's some kind of export limit, and that does affect the reliability of the water supply for the state water project. So this map here shows that delta area and kind of a satellite view of what that delta area looks like. So in the inset map, it shows the, sorry about that. So in that inset map, it shows those delta islands and all of those channels that flow into the San Francisco Bay. Thanks very much. And that's the upper Bay area, and then that water continues on to the North San Francisco Bay and out to the Golden Gate. All of that area, a lot of it is agriculture. You see the city of Stockton on the south end, the city of Sacramento on the north end, and the Sacramento River from the north drains into this Bay area and Delta. And then from the south, the San Joaquin River, the major river from the San Joaquin Valley, flows north and meets up with the Sacramento River, and they call that a delta system. And so that's the area that we're talking about. The area has been highly changed over 150 years, and so how does a state with a large population that counts on water from the system, 26 million people that count on that water, areas in the north, San Francisco Bay, Napa, and Solano counts on water from the state project. South Bay, the Silicon Valley, Alameda, and the San Jose area. And then along the coast, the Santa Barbara area counts on water from the state water project, as does San Luis Obispo. The San Joaquin Valley, for much of the agricultural production, counts on both the state water project and the Central Valley project. And then down in Southern California, there are a number of contractors, in addition to Metropolitan Water District, that count on water from the state water project. So how to make the state water project reliable for the state of California, and also how to build back into the system some of the wetlands and habitat that has been removed over the years, 150 years of change, a lot of it due to agriculture and flood control. So there are two efforts, the Water Fix, which is the water delivery part of it, and then there's the Eco Restore, which is to actually develop some of the wetland habitat back into the system. 2006 is when the state embarked on what was called the Bay Delta Conservation Plan, and that's all led to California Water Fix. So the state has been involved in a process for 12 years, and it started back in the Schwarzenegger administration and has stretched through the Brown administration. In 2015, the state identified California Water Fix as the major project to improve the water delivery system, and then the Eco Restore is the way to restore vital habitat. And they both happen in parallel. They get permitted separately, but it's intended to help improve the Delta system for the state and for us for reliable water supplies. So after a lot of years, from 2015 on, they've done a couple of big things. They completed an environmental impact report and impact statement, both under state and federal law. And that document, the findings were approved in 2016. Last year, so we're in 2018. So the environmental impact report was approved last year, and then also the endangered species permits were issued, both on the state and the federal side. There are some additional consultation efforts or processes that would occur prior to the start of operation, but some very big decisions were made in terms of how the project would be permitted under both the state and the Federal Endangered Species Act. Most recently, though, earlier this month, there was an announcement by the state to its water contractors that the state is prepared to go forward with what's called a staged approach to implementing the project. So some of the background is the key decision remaining really is twofold. One, how does it get financed and who pays for it? Secondly, a water rights permit from the State Water Board that is necessary for the diversion point for the tunnels. And so the state identified the ability, their preparation and ability to move forward with the staged approach so that the project could go forward if no other water contractors step forward other than the state water project contractors. So the state water project contractors have been working for a couple of years now on how they would approach their cost sharing and cost allocation. But the federal water project, and some of you may have seen in the news last year, Westland's Water District, they've been hesitant to support the project, and in the case of Westland's, the board voted not to support, at least at that time, financing the project. So the state is developing this strategy to move the project forward to assure that there is an alignment of funding partners and a project so that there's no lost opportunity to fix the system. And I'm going to go into a little detail about the project in a minute, but the staged approach would be stage one, building about 2/3 of the capacity and then leaving the remaining third of the capacity to a second stage with further funding partners as they would be developed. The importance of the project, though, is to allow for diversions on the Sacramento River to improve conditions for fish. The present diversion point in the South Delta is in the wrong place, and the state, when it built the State Water Project in the early 60s, recognized during that period that they would need to go back and fix that. But here we are, 50 or so years later, and we're still dealing with a system that needs to be improved in that regard. The diversion point in the south end of the Delta is not good for fish. So this is adding those diversion points and allowing for the diversion in the north end of the Delta as well as the south end, probably a 50-50 split on average every year, 50% of the water coming from the north diversions and 50 from the south. It would be an underground tunnel, so for those that have followed water for a long time, there was an effort in 1980 and 1982 to build a canal, at least a planning effort, and that didn't succeed. This would be an underground tunnel because it has less impact on the surrounding environment. And it would be, the proposed project is 2 side-by-side tunnels, 40 feet in diameter. The proposed stage approach would be to do 1 tunnel and then wait on the second stage until further funding was to materialize. But having these diversion points in the tunnels and the facilities and the screens for the fish would be a great advantage and improvement for the fishery, and that's why the state is continuing to move forward. I mentioned that the EIR and the endangered species permits were approved with this staged approach. The state has analyzed, and they're going to be doing some subsequent supplemental environmental documentation, but they don't believe that the analysis will show any new impacts, either water quality or fisheries related, but they're going to be going through that supplemental analysis. This is the map just showing the facilities, about a 35 mile tunnel under the Delta, 2 side-by-side tunnels. With the project going staged, the eastern end, or the facilities in blue, would be done first, and then the facilities in gold would be second. So 2 of the 3 intakes would be done in the first stage, and then the third intake would be in the second stage. Like I said, 1 tunnel in the first stage and 1 tunnel in the second stage. The reason that it's important to this area and to Southern California is ensuring the reliability of the state water project supply that we all count on. And in particular, the storage capability, the ability to store water in wet years is really important. Preparing for droughts and emergencies, you can't make up that kind of water with other types of water projects. The ability to store water in our groundwater basins, and protecting the investments that the ratepayers have made over many years in the facilities, not only the state water project facilities, but all of the storage facilities that take state project water, the treatment plants, and the distribution facilities. Over $5 billion worth of facilities in Southern California alone, not counting the state project, that have added to the system. So one of the things that I like to highlight is storage is real key to managing water. Last year was wet, need to store water. And in fact, last year we were able to store 1.2 million acre feet. We doubled the amount of dry year water in our storage facilities in 1 year because of that wet year. But this year we find ourselves in another dry year. So managing that water is really key. And the green is the dry year storage, the orange is the emergency storage for earthquakes. The blue is the water storage that could be added with Cal WaterFix. So there was a modeling effort to look at how could it benefit Southern California and the Met region. And we could have almost doubling what kind of supply we have in 2017 if we had that kind of reliability with the system. Economic benefits are real key in terms of protecting jobs. The state estimates about 1.1 million jobs protected by reliable water supplies, and the state's economy being over $2 trillion, and Southern California being $1 trillion. The ecosystem benefits, the delivery points and the tunnels themselves would help improve fish conditions, but also the habitat restoration would be important to bringing back fish populations as well. I talked about these actions as far as the big milestones. When we did an analysis, when our board took this up last fall, we said that the cost of it would be between $2 and $3 per household per month to improve this system. And certainly I'm sensitive to the fact that costs and rates, there's projects that need to be done locally, there's projects that need to be done regionally, and then we're talking about the statewide projects. So part of what we showed our board was the business case that from a cost standpoint, the reliability that you get for this investment is very favorable, and it helps us to invest in more expensive supplies by offsetting those costs with lower cost reliability with the improvement of the state water project. So the next steps is really getting the financing together, and I'm sure we'll go through a lot of that in the question and answer period in terms of how Metropolitan is going through their second phase of decision making on how it moves forward with the financing. And then once that all gets completed, starting with a couple of joint powers authorities that would actually fund and design and construct the project. So we're getting to some key actions in 2018 to actually make things happen. And look forward to questions later. Thanks very much.
Well, thank you, Stephen. And again, we're going to go through all of the panelists first, and then we're going to do the Q&A at that point. You know, a couple things though that Stephen did talk about is one is he talked about serving half the population, and if you look at the state of California, we always have this north versus south attitude, and if you really split California in half by population, what I've heard is that line could be drawn right down Wilshire Boulevard, way down there, and that's about half the population if you look at north versus south. So Northern California is not that far away. How many people here have gone on a Delta tour, on a Delta water tour? Very good. I'll tell you, it's really amazing when you go there and you see pictures of the subsidence that Stephen talked about. And the pictures really, they don't do it justice, do they? You really have to be there to see, how dramatic that settling is. And so for those of you that haven't had a chance to go, I definitely say, find a way to go on a water trip to the Delta, and you learn a lot. It's just amazing. So let's move on to our second panelist. Our panelist offers both a statewide and a city perspective on water issues. Jose Solario served in Sacramento as a state assemblyman, where he worked with the state lawmakers on infrastructure improvements and water policy. Now a member of the Santa Ana City Council, Jose has nearly 20 years of public affairs, marketing, public relations, research, and communication experience. He uses those skills for NASAMAN, a public policy group, to help organizations and businesses large and small. They tackle tough policy issues, public policy issues, and partner with key decision makers to deliver solutions. So ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jose Solario.
So my son, who's a sophomore in high school, he gives me a hard time for using Wikipedia as a source. He's like, Dad, that's not a credible source. But I say, but it's a reference. It's a starting point. So before I get into some of the points I'm making, let me tell you how Wikipedia defines the Sacramento-San Joaquin River Delta. Because, I was a farmer boy from the Bakersfield area, and I grew actually like a quarter mile from the California aqueduct. So I've always have seen water, looked at it, touched it, et cetera, but I didn't know where it came from. And so it comes from this delta, and it's defined in Wikipedia as an expansive inland river delta and estuary in Northern California. So there you go. I joined the legislature in 2006. So I was there 2006 to 2012. So kind of, almost along the lines of when this project started, and Schwarzenegger era to the Brown era. And so I go up there, and water was a big issue for me because I know it's a big California issue and my roots and all the rest. And so you realize real quick that there are big north-south political debates and problems. And so I have a few images that I'm going to share, then I'll talk a little bit more. So this map here, and it's a little bit hard to read, but it essentially talks about all the water that goes through the Delta area and where it ends up at. And so a lot of it comes down to Southern California, and that was mentioned, but a lot of it really goes right back out to the ocean. And that really is not a good thing, especially given that much of California is a desert, and we really need every drop possible. The other thing that I learned is of the folks that benefit from the infrastructure that we have. Southern California, definitely a lot of focus on that. But on the Northern California side, San Francisco benefits directly from the infrastructure, as does the San Jose area. So we do kind of have some allies up there, but they're just so outnumbered by everybody around that it still largely is a north-south political problem. But we also got to find our friends where they are, and so we can't forget about some of those allies up there. And in one of the earlier meetings where we're having big debates on water, because again we were starting to have some of these conversations in the legislature, we had one legislator who's now in Congress, Jared Huffman, and there'd be all these fights, and a lot of it was really around this idea that, way back when, so this is an image of the 1800s, what that area looked like. And so there was much more natural habitat, throughout that area. And now maybe about 5% of this is left in terms of natural habitat. And so that's kind of the factual point, but there was kind of a blame element of, and now we don't have this because of Southern California. You're taking all our water. And, I came from local government even back then, and I'm all, well, you know what? It was your farmers and planters that allowed it to go from this to, now this is a Google Earth image. this is, you know, I worked in the Capitol, so that's kind of my view of the Sacramento area. So that's, you know, the area near the 5 and, you know, the American River there. So as you can see now, very little natural habitat. And here and that was kind of in that urban area. This now is kind of southwest of the Capitol area, so more farm area. But you could see it's green, but it's farmland. And it's not Southern California farmers, it's Northern California farmers. And it was, you know, Northern California planning commissioners and council members and board of supervisors that really allowed the situation to be what it is. And not that it's bad, but just, you know, you can't blame everything on SoCal. Here is an area northeast of the Capitol area, so where you could see, you know, a little bit of a habitat and marshes, and that kind of gives you a sense of what the area looks like. But there still is a big north-south divide, and so I'm from Orange County, and as you know, Orange County doesn't send up a lot of Democrats, and I would even kid around. I'm from, you know, I'm a Democrat, but I'm from Orange County, so how liberal can I be? And so I was the rep up there, and I knew that Met, as big and powerful as it is, because they're the 800-pound gorilla. I mean, definitely in SoCal, but even statewide and nationally. And so I'd be, as we were working these initial deals, I'm, well, Jeff, so who are your champions that Met, particularly out of the LA area, because that's where all the leadership is and where all the Democratic members are. And he's all, well, we don't really have a champion for water. I'm all, what are you talking about? I mean, as big as an agency and all these members, and there has to be somebody interested in water and infrastructure. And he was all, not really. And so I ended up actually kind of being the de facto leader for this coalition, and I'd coordinate the calls and the meetings with other, you know, SoCal legislators, you know, Republicans and Democrats. And there were some legislators that were interested from the LA area, but only the conservation piece. They only want to talk about conservation. They didn't want to talk about water supply or things like desal or other things. And so that's why, since my years in the legislature, I was very involved with this. Outside, and some of you may have it, when Schwarzenegger approved a very comprehensive legislative water package that the legislature put together in 2009, I did an op-ed that kind of summarized a lot of that work, as well as, you know, just for folks remembering big concepts, I kind of broke it all down to the 3 C's. You know, the 3 C's of water and what's important for California, and there were direct relations to the water package that we did. Number 1, conserve. You know, we could continue to conserve, and in terms of, you know, value and, you know, where you put your dollars, it's a very cost-effective way of having water. So we got to continue to do that. In SoCal, we do an excellent job. And as part of that package was when we did the item of conserving 20% by 2020. And that actually was a great standard. At the time, it seemed a little bit tough, but you know what? Now, some years later, we achieved it. And we actually, even now today, say this is kind of the approach that we like when we set big goals, and then you let local areas decide how to get there. Another key piece is capture. You know, all this rain comes down, but if we don't have places to capture it, it just flows out to the ocean, or it ends up in places where we really can't take full advantage of it. And so we worked on the water bond language back then and created a lot of different vehicles for doing a better job of capture. And separate but related, it even was the small stuff, and kind of one of my pride and joys, at least in the water area, was, believe it or not, rain barrels before this time period, they were illegal. It was actually technically illegal to capture rainwater from your roof, put it in a rain barrel, and use it for personal use. And that's because a lot of water rights law is based off of, you know, basic ideas that, you know, rainwater will end up in a groundwater basin that someone has rights to, or ends up in a river that someone has rights to. So this idea that you could kind of like capture it on site and use it was not really a legal concept. And in fact, the concept and the idea, as simple as rainwater, was not defined in law. So it wasn't actually until I did legislation that got signed into law where we defined rainwater, stormwater, and then there's been other, you know, legislation that now kind of is building off of that. And actually even doing that simple idea of, hey, allow us to capture rainwater for on-site, non-potable use, like, like washing your car or windows, gardens, etc. Even it was a simple and good idea, then people generally liked that. There were union fights about what codes you use for the plumbing and the outdoor, that it was actually like about a 3-year complicated process to get that enacted into law, but it was a good thing. The final C is conveyance. Where the water falls is not always where you need it, especially statewide or even at the local level, where you have it, you still got to get it to people's homes. And so the conveyance piece is very important. And, during that time period, what was called then the BDCP was an important vehicle for us to, upgrade our infrastructure and convey that water up and down the state. A key breakthrough, because I mentioned, the north-south fights that we were having in the legislature, was we came up with this concept that really people bought into, was that we got to really have co-equal goals, 2 goals. That this water reliability through something like BDCP, or now what's known as waterfix, that's a key goal. But just as important a goal was restoring the ecosystem in that area for the fish, the natural habitat, and everything else that was a part of that. That was significant in terms of making everybody feel good. And then that gets also to interest groups. The enviros felt then like they were being paid attention to, and that their priorities were real. And then building trades and other coalitions and cities and Matt liked the idea that we were saying the water reliability and conveyance was also important. Another key thing that we kind of did under the radar in those early years, we said, we don't want this BDCP process, this water fix process, that would have to be approved through the legislature. We wanted to kind of be considered as a contractor project that would go through an EIR process and handle it that way without, bills needed to go through to approve it, and that's been a very significant thing. Beginning to wrap up as we move forward, and the Sacramento and the political impacts. We have a great governor who I think wants to get this done, and I got some ideas to say, hey, get this all done, and the state board, they work for you, let's get this done, governor, before you leave. But he is going to be termed out, and so we now really have, I think, what's a big race between a Northern California candidate for governor in Gavin Newsom, and a Southern California candidate in Tony Villaraigosa. I mean, that race now really, if you've been watching it the way I have, it's essentially a statistical dead heat. Newsom has, 2-3 points on Villaraigosa, but it's close. And I think in part because of where they come from, Villaraigosa is going to be a little bit closer to the SoCal interest, farmer interest, Inter-Valley interest, and Gavin Newsom, even though they need some of this water too, his larger voter base up there has some concern, so he has a little bit of a tougher situation to deal with. So that's something to watch. And then every year there are also legislative threats. There are always bills introduced by Northern California legislators to try to throw a monkey wrench in this whole thing. So we'll see what those big threats are this year, but everybody working together, Matt, and I know we're going to hear from Charlie, working together. We got to fight those things off. And then sometimes there are even, initiative challenges. There was not long ago this idea that any big project over $2 billion that's financed through certain ways needs to go to a statewide vote of the people. And it was to deal with things like, big transportation projects, but also things like this that would be caught up into it. So we got to keep looking out for those threats. But that at least kind of gives you a sense of how we got here and some of the legislative dynamics involved. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Jose. It was great to hear a little bit about this, statewide dynamics that are going on in the legislature, and it's really interesting. And yeah, you talked about a couple of things. One, you talked about the governor race coming up and how important that's going to be, and you mentioned a couple candidates. I didn't hear any Republican names.
I only talked about the top 2.
And you also, the other thing we see here is a lot of photos of the Sacramento area, and we have the beautiful rivers up there. And one thing that's kind of different than Southern California, those are blue. you know, and people ski in it, they fish in it, they do a lot of things there, so it's really pretty interesting. Can you imagine anybody skiing in the Santa Ana River? Yeah, you don't see that too much. Or water skiing, can you imagine them doing that? Yeah, probably not. Anyway, it's definitely a lot of difference between Northern California and Southern California. But now let's move on, and last but definitely not least is our third panelist, is Charlie Wilson. He serves as the Executive Director and CEO of the Southern California Water Coalition, a nonprofit, nonpartisan public education partnership dedicated to informing Southern Californians about water needs and the state's water resources. The Water Coalition is the largest coalition of interested public and private entities dedicated specifically to securing a reliable supply of water for Southern California. Charlie's been a leading public affairs professional in Southern California for more than 30 years and also serves as the governing board member on the Santa Margarita Water District. So, ladies and gentlemen, Charlie Wilson.
Dwayne, thank you very much. What he left out was that he and I also share a background in the electric utility business. We're supposed to know something about infrastructure, and I was taught many years ago that electricity and water are not supposed to mix. Clearly, the two of us have lessons still to learn. There are some similarities between water and energy, and I'll touch on a couple of those, but thank you for the invitation this morning to be with all of you. You have heard from the technical expertise at Metropolitan. You've heard from his self-described politician in Santa Ana in the state legislature. I get to be your blunt instrument. So let me share with you a couple of observations, and as Dwayne described, the Southern California Water Coalition has been around since 1984. It does not escape the irony that, as was described, the last time we had a statewide issue around moving water around the Delta was in 1982, then referenced in a statewide ballot initiative as Duke's Ditch. We're still talking about the same issue 30 years after the fact. So we talk about how long it takes to build freeways, what it takes to build housing, what it takes to build other needed public infrastructure on which to build our economy. This issue has been at risk for over 35 years. This system was built by Pat Brown in the 60s. It doesn't escape my attention either that it is Jerry Brown in his first term as governor. You remember Governor Moonbeam? We used to lampoon him when I still had hair and couldn't grow a beard. It was Governor Moonbeam, and he was out there crazy. And today, in the second term as governor, the same governor is talking about the same project to improve his father's investment. That should not go empty-handed into the public's attention, because we continue to go around and around and around. So let me share with you a couple of observations since we've been working on this issue since 1984. It's a long time with a lot of expertise. As Dwayne indicated, we have this really broad coalition of people. It is the only one of its kind in the state that has farmers from the ag community, business, industry, cities, counties, water agencies, yes, labor, ooh, scary. What is it that all of these people have to come together around that they understand, the experts understand the importance of Southern California? We don't have a shortage of water in California. We have poor plumbing. We have the rain and snow that falls in the Sierra Nevadas. The single greatest resource are the snowpack of the Sierra Nevadas. Now, you can argue climate change as to why and where and its origins or not, and I don't care. The issue is we have wetter years and drier years. So when it's wet and it rains and we have snow, fabulous. It melts slowly and we can pull it. If it rains and we don't get the snow, it comes fast and washes out the Golden Gate. The fact is we cannot move water through the existing system because it's outdated and because of environmental regulations and fish populations that have changed, and it has changed, we can't move water. So the question is, do we have the leadership capacity and desire to modernize a 60-year-old system, to build the legacy for the next generation in California? When this system was all put in place, the state of California bonded itself to levels unprecedented in our history. And yet they had the leadership and the foresight to know, and out of that we created the 6th largest economy in the world. And we are living off of the legacy of people in the 1950s and 60s. Nobody wants to make the leadership decision to be able to move forward. Metropolitan now is taking that leadership. Jose pointed to who was the standard bearer on water. There isn't one in Southern California. When we started our campaign, we went out like anybody. I don't like to just talk to people at the local Vons and say that's what the people think. We actually went out and did scientific polling. When you ask people in Southern California, where's your water come from? They point to the sink. I'm not kidding. When you ask them, do you know where the delta is? What's the delta? Oh, absolutely. The delta faucet in my sink. That's what they know. In Northern California, you see it. You swim in it. You recreate in it. You fish. In Southern California, we get water in our creeks, channels, rivers, about 1 month out of the year, maybe. At Santa Margarita, I've asked with the San Juan Creek issue, hey, we ought to go down, take a nice picture with our board, running the rapids of the San Juan Creek. And if I go down, it's a rubber raft in a dry creek bed with paddles, and we have to wear helmets because we're about to hurt ourselves. There is no water on the surface in Southern California because they don't see it. It's out of sight, out of mind. So the question is, what do we have to do to provide reliability going forward? Lots of things we've already talked about. The delta, this is the blunt force piece of it. It's not if, when the delta fails. When the delta fails, it will salt out. As sea level rises, it will salt out. The pumping that we rely on today for 1/3 of our water supply will be gone. What does 1/3 of the water that you deliver today in Southern Orange County gone means? Shutting everything off. You're now into the Cape Town style of conservation. That quick. Let me also share, because we talked about Cape Town, but around the globe we don't recognize these things. But in Mexico City, Cape Town, Cairo, Mexico, Beijing, Sao Paulo, Singapore, and you expect it in the Middle East. Places like Israel and Jordan, all of those are significant major metropolitan centers, all of whom are on the verge of water reliability collapse. If you don't think it can happen in California because we're just too good, we're too smart, or we'll just fix it when the problem comes, by the time the problem comes, it's too late. The existing proposal that we're talking about in modernizing the state's water delivery system has been in the works for how many years? 12 years. Millions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of pages of environmental review. This isn't something somebody just pulled out of their hat and said, hey, let's go build a tunnel. This has been reviewed under California law, and multiple administrations have determined that this project is the most cost-efficient means by which to make sure there is a reliable water supply for Central and Southern California. And coming out again out of the electric business, you have to have a base on which to do everything else. The State Water Project is our base. It's what allows recycling to happen. It's what allows stormwater capture, treatment, and delivery to happen. It's what allows every other local means to take place. Without it, by example, and nobody is articulating this would actually take place, but to replace the State Water Project at 30% would require 12 ocean desalination plants from Los Angeles, or from Ventura to Orange County. Wrap your heads around that for just a second. 12 plants the size of what's been proposed in Huntington Beach. That's only taken 17 years in its development and has not yet got approvals to be constructed. What would it take to build 12 of those? How would you replace that water? I would also share with you, because we didn't have this in place last year, when it did rain after 6 years of drought, we got so much rain, it was wonderful, green, fabulous. We lost enough water out the Golden Gate because we couldn't move it to supply every person and every business in Ventura, Anaheim, Long Beach, Riverside, Santa Ana, and San Diego combined in 1 year because we couldn't move the water. That's what we lost. How many millions of dollars? How much? That's the storage that Metropolitan could have used. So you have to do an all-the-above strategy. So as I said, we're looking at the Water Coalition. Clearly, this is priority one for the state. And there are other issues we need to grapple with, and nothing happens in a vacuum. Yes, we need to conserve more. We can always conserve more. Use it better, use it wiser, become more efficient with how we use water. Recycling, stormwater, desal, other local supply projects. But local supply projects are augmentations. They're extra. It's for our population growth that meet our local hydrology needs. And every area is different. But without the base of the State Water Project, we are in a dramatically different and dramatically altered economic cycle. So I guess if I were to really structure this in a way, as to what the issue really is, it's about leadership. This isn't about whether or not you technically can move water. It's about leadership. And the question is, for the populace in Southern California, is it important enough for you, your family, and your jobs to stand up and make your own voice heard? So we have an adage at the Water Coalition: you educate to advocate. I don't have to advocate for much of anything. If I educate the reality of where we are today, you will advocate on your own self-interest, on your own behalf. I mean, I know we have housing crisis. We have a terrible housing crisis, but people focus on homeless in the Santa Ana riverbed. You don't build any houses without water. In the same way you don't build houses without roads. These things are not separate and distinct. And to remain as the 6th largest economy in the world, we have to do something beyond just complain. There is a horrible lack of confidence in government and government's ability to actually make significant progress on important public policy issues. This is an opportunity for the state and for us as locals to prove that California can go forward and provide its needs for future populations. I mean, it's a lot of structure and the details we can get into in the Q&A as to how this deal is put together. But from a cost-effective standpoint, this is the most cost-effective way to assure reliability for Southern California. Somewhere between 2 to 12 times more expensive for everything else we would do. Take away the 30%, that 2 to 12 times doubles or triples. So if you want to see what your water bills are like today, stand by. I mean,
We're involved together very low, so we're off to a good start.
Yeah, as I recall, we made great strides, and it was a good thing to do when Metropolitan had, what, $500 million in turf removal program. If you equated the $500 million to remove turf, it was the same cost as providing ocean desalinated water, a one-time. The advantage is, once you take the turf out, that should be a forever, if nobody comes in and replants the lawn. It's an all-the-above strategy. You can't do one without the other. You can't remove enough turf to take away the 30% supply reliability. You can't conserve your way out of a drought any more you can strangle people on the freeways into abandoning their car for a bus. You have to build new, and it's a combination, and it's a weight and a measure between the two. So I find it to be about leadership. We certainly have stepped up to play our role with our coalition. I'm very much appreciative of the chance to come and talk to you about it this morning. If you wanted more information, you can go to our website at socal.org. SoCal.org. In case you missed that, it's SoCal.org. But we would love to have you as part of the coalition, but it won't happen unless you make your voices heard through your local agency, to Metropolitan board members who will vote on this in April, and to your state legislature, because it's just not high on the list here. It is not high on their list. It gets there through you. It gets there through you. Make it known. Make sure this is a priority so we can move this thing forward. Thank you.
Yeah, that was outstanding, Charlie. Thank you very much. And educate and advocate. I think that's extremely important. That's the message we have. Can you imagine anybody better at advocating a position than Charlie? He really laid it out right there. it shows you why he is the executive director and CEO of Southern California Water Coalition. And they do a great job. And it truly is about leadership. And Molten Miguel here, we're trying to take leadership positions. And you're here because you're trying to take leadership positions. And then it's time for us to move forward. We need to advocate. That's why we're here. And infrastructure, no matter if it's water, if it's electricity, if it's roads, it takes a long time to build, a long time to get approved. And so there's a lot of things that we need to do to fix that process, and especially with the state legislature as we look forward. So anyway, a lot coming forward. So again, let's give a round of applause to all of our panelists right now. And at this time, I have a couple questions that we're going to ask for each of the panelists. I'm going to turn it over to the board for their questions, and then we're going to open it up to the public at large. So let's start off with Stephen. And Stephen, we talk about the water fix, and we say, the situation, after listening today, it's urgent. But what are Molten Miguel or Metropolitan Water District's plans if the California water fix does not move forward this year?
Yeah, I think, the message I was trying to convey is that important decisions have been made with the environmental, approvals, the Endangered Species Act and all of that. So now we got to get the financing to come together, and we need to organize to actually design and construct the project. So if that doesn't happen, it basically means we're going to be doing what we've been doing, limping along, and having the questionable reliability of the state water project. Not theoretical, actually been losing water over a number of years. So if you look at the trend over the last 25 years, almost every 5 years there's been a decision that has reduced the supply and the reliability. So it's really urgent because we're at a point where either we step up and make the key decisions, or we risk having a situation like in 1982 where that opportunity goes away for 30 or 40 years, or probably more likely it's until an earthquake occurs, and then it can't be done as well. I mean, if you're having to scramble after an earthquake, the ability to do the project, the dynamics behind that is going to change. So I think that it's an opportunity that we don't want to lose. And if there is no decision this year on even a staged project, I think that it just puts that huge risk on our water supply, that at any time there could be a major disruption, either because of the fish or because of an earthquake, and all of us suffer because of that.
Thank you. Yeah, another kind of follow-up question on that too is that I think Charlie said that the rates will go up $2 to $3 per customer for this if the project goes forward. But what's the cost? What happens to water rates, Stephen, if the project doesn't move forward?
Yeah, so the cost of this project on rates would be increasing about 1% per year over maybe a 15-year period during construction. So think of it as the total increase being 15, maybe 50, somewhere between 15 and 20%, but that increase will ramp up, not all at once. It's not a stair step. It would ramp up over the construction period. The cost of alternative supplies are at least 2 to 3 times more expensive. So if you're talking about recycle projects or seawater desalination that we kind of know about, projects that are fitting the mold of other projects that we've been studying inside out, it's 2 to 3 times more. If we're talking about projects that are yet to be formulated that we don't know much about, we don't know the risks and all, then we're at the 12 times that Charlie referred to earlier. So when talking about rate stability, we know that water is going to get more expensive, but if we have the ability to protect the water that we have and do it in a cost-effective, favorable way, a huge amount of volume, then that just makes sense. If we don't do that, if we lose that reliability, then our rates are going to go up quite a bit.
Well, thank you very much. Let's move on to Jose. For you, you talked a little bit about the 2009 water bill that Governor Schwarzenegger signed. And you talked about the 3 C's, capture, convey, and conserve. Back then you wrote, Orange County knows how to conserve water, and the legislation was crafted to give credit to communities that have a history of conservation. Although we've grown by more than 1 million people over the last 25 years, our water use in Orange County has stayed relatively flat. More Californians need to follow Orange County's best practices to conserve water. So is that still true today? And is Orange County still a leader in conservation?
Yeah, I think Orange County and really the entire mid area, we're doing really well. I mean, another stat that I always recall and speak about is we use about the same amount of water today that we did in the 1980s, even though our population has grown tremendously. So we continue to conserve and get smarter and innovate. And you know, Moulton, for example, with your turf removal program, you know, you're geographically in Orange County, you know, not the biggest district, but the lion's share of all the turf removal has happened right here in districts. So you're definitely, you know, leading the way. And then, you know, the state right now, they're working on new water conservation policies and the water-based budgets that we use here at Moulton and that Irvine Rancho also uses. Really kind of is a template for, you know, the thinking of what the entire state should be doing. So I think we continue to innovate on the policy side and in practice. And then as individual consumers, we're all doing better. I think the shortest showers are always a challenge, you know, for folks of all age, but we are doing very well overall.
Okay. If you can answer us, who's against the California water fix and why? And then as a follow-up, how do we get them in this room so we can talk to them?
Well, it's tough. You know, it's you know, most of the folks, you know, north of Wilshire. I think somebody said that Wilshire's the dividing point. But again, we have some allies. You know, we have some allies in San Francisco and San Jose. So I think we gotta hug them a little bit closer, and we gotta go out and vote and make sure we get you know, a good governor and somebody that could prioritize this project, because there is a little bit of worry that this all really may not be done. You know, between now and November, and so whoever the next governor is, that's the person that we all need to, you know, look to, you know, whether it's a Democrat or a Republican. But currently, the top two are Newsom and Villarreal, so we want to make sure we educate to advocate, and so that when it's time for them to do some of this work, they can also implement a fantastic project.
Very good. Charlie, you recently wrote in the Desert Sun, I'm going to paraphrase this, if we had a crystal ball that shows the future, it's going to look cloudy at best, and it's very unpredictable. So even though we had a lot of rain last year, we may have been lulled into a sense of relief from the rain that we saw, but now we're potentially facing another extremely dry year this year. So with that in mind, can you talk a little bit about the false sense of security and how we can engage the public on the importance of water policy when we're in uphill battle against the news coverage?
Absolutely, because I think we touched on it here. There's a couple of things you do. When it rains, obviously everybody says, woohoo, we're all done, March miracle. And because you can't move the water, you can't store the water, it's gone. It's a one-time use. It's not, you know, it's kind of like the energy days. You're supposed to be able to store this thing. And the great breakthroughs in energy is now we can store it in some capacity. Well, we can store it, but that requires additional storage facilities to be built. You gotta have the plumbing to be able to move it. This is not a sexy issue for people. That's why I talked about this being a leadership issue. I had a debate about a year and a half ago where I got to be the piñata in Sacramento from Southern California. And they keep telling me if you hit me hard enough, yes, one day I will spew candy. That is because Southern California has the population. We have the candy. We have the rate base. We have the people that pay the bills. And again, it's not an either or, but in this case, there was a state legislator who shall remain nameless, but she, from maybe Stockton area, made a statement, and she represents her constituents very well. It's that map that Jose showed, a lot of farming interests, and she represents her interests very well. And she made a statement that said, we believe in that particular community that all water should remain where it falls. All water should remain where it falls. To which I had no other retort other than, well, If that's appropriate state policy, then all taxes should remain where generated. Oh, no, that's not what I meant. That's not what I meant. So that's where it became an issue of public policy. So I'm going to bring it back, and I never like to lay blame at anybody's footsteps, but we're to blame. Look at yourselves in the room. We're to blame. How many of us have gone to our state legislators and said, this is a priority for Southern California. Make it a priority for you. We have lots of priorities in Southern California. We generally like to talk about things like social policy because it's much sexier, it's much more visceral in the emotional reaction. Water doesn't get the same kind of reaction until it's not there. It's like electricity. You don't care, you don't pay attention until the lights don't come on. And then Mr. Probalski is really, really angry, and he calls me. When the water is not there, trust me, it will not be polite. It will be very angry because we are looked at as water experts to just take care of it. And it's not enough for public agencies to do this because we, as public agencies, don't elect senators, assembly members, and governors. It is about voters and about those who help supply the funds for those people to run for office. Let's be blunt. Who elects people is who matters. And we need to make sure that those who elect candidates to state and other office know that this is a priority. So that's why I call it cloudy. I will tell you that I'm going through it now. We have a board meeting in April. I have invited the gubernatorial candidates. I can tell you that one may or may not be from the San Francisco Bay Area has declined. Not interested in coming to Southern California to talk about water. I have others, they're very interested in talking about water because they know it's important within that constituency base for them to pay attention to it. So we're trying to raise the voice and the noise level, but there's a lot of noise going on around politics. And I think one of the other advantages to what Metropolitan is putting together as we've seen the financing, this is a user pay. This is not a tax issue. So that if you have good conservation in your community, the cheapest water you'll ever use is that which you don't use. So if you use it, you'll pay for the system. If you don't use it, it's free. That's far better than going through tax measures that require broad-based taxing authority across the state. So it really puts the control in the hands of the consumer and our constituents. I think that ultimately is a better way to put something together and not have to rely upon where people fall short, which is, hey, the state or the feds or whoever, they can never get anything big done. So take it out of their hands, finance it through locals, and do a JPA to get it constructed so it's done on time and on budget. And then you never have the criticism of whether or not the state or the feds or anybody else could actually make this thing happen.
Thank you, Charlie. It's apparent that the Southern California Water Coalition is doing educating and advocacy on water policy. It's there, and you're right at the very top. Let's see if you move into that financial advocacy for your new policy there. So we'll see if that works. I like to keep the money here too. But as we know that you're moving forward with your advocacy, what can the members here do to help move this project forward? What advice would you give them?
This is good old-fashioned high school civics. Write, call, make sure your state legislative members understand this is a priority. I have no doubt in my mind whatsoever, somebody's going to try to be creative in Sacramento. They're going to try to derail this thing. They're going to throw roadblocks, hurdles in the way. Our delegation in Orange County is really quite strong in this regard, but it's about Los Angeles County. It's about the legislative leadership. You would think with the Senate Pro Tem and the Speaker of the House now both from Los Angeles, this would be an absolute slam dunk. And it's not, because they are still pulled from a very vocal minority from their Northern California caucus. You have to offset that with reinvigorating and creating a buzz around Southern California. That's phone calls, that's letters, that's emails. They have to know this is a priority, so somebody is there to stand up when somebody from the San Francisco coalition says, hey, we don't like it. In fact, if you go, you know this from the trip. He does a lot of these Bay Delta trips. When you're on the boat or on the bus going along these Delta levees, what are the signs that you see? Southern California, don't take my water. Southern California, piss off. Southern California, you are the evildoer. I've joked with Jeff Keitlinger when he goes into forums up there, it's better if you wear the red suit with the horns and the tail. It's easier to identify you and you know your role. It is a loud, vocal minority in that section of the state. We have to raise the voice in Southern California so that they have the tools that they need to be able to withstand that kind of onslaught.
Thank you very much. Any questions from the board?
Maybe
Don.
not a question or maybe a observation, just going back to the peripheral canal days and the referendum, generally speaking, the people in Northern California supported the referendum like 90%. People in Southern California supported it maybe 60%. How do we get those ratios, or where does the messaging have to come from to Southern Californians or to Northern Californians to try and convince them we're trying to, be sensitive to their concerns? But we also had a feeling that people in Northern California are born with a gene that says Southern California is trying to steal their water. So maybe that's a two-part question. Number one, you can clarify whether they in fact have that gene. And secondly, is there a way to turn them somewhat around to where it's not 90-10?
That's a politically sensitive question, so I'll answer it. It's because the narrative for going on 30, 35 years is, and as long as we allow that narrative to exist, that Southern California, quote, is stealing our water, it continues. And there is nobody in the Bay Area to counter that. It's a very haphazard sort of mixed, opportunity when I get to go up there and be beaten like with a stick. The issue really is, in the same way that the tax base and the ratepayer base and the population base is all in the South, the opportunity is in the South. Because if it ever got to a statewide referendum, which I don't, the way it's constructed today, there's nothing to referendize because it's independent of the state money. It would require 70% of Southern California simply to drown out that minority viewpoint. It's that simple. It's just it's a pure political weights and measures. Now, if you got to that, that's millions and millions of dollars to communicate to the 26 million Southern Californians, meaning from Bakersfield south. So that's a heavy, heavy political lift. The other thing we get stuck with and where we balance back and forth is the issue about agriculture. Again, agriculture is a critical piece of all of this. It makes sense for us for our reliability for urban Southern California. Let us not forget that part of the economy here, and a fairly significant part of the economy, are the farmers that grow the food that we eat. So you're going to pay one way or the other, either in higher food prices or in some slightly higher rates. Again, if you craft it the way they've crafted it, it seems to make the most sense and has the least opposition to it. But you have to be able to clearly articulate the value proposition. As an agency, you have to do it when you raise rates, when you go through your Prop 218 hearing cycles. You have to clearly delineate, this is why there's a value to the water that we provide you. And we have to do it at the district level, at the business level, at the ag level. You have to do it with your neighbors next door. It is hand to hand. It's that significant. But if you have a general mass of folks that are moving, waiting for somebody else to do it, ain't gonna happen. You cannot wait for somebody else to do this for you.
And I would add that the challenge continues because, number one, not only are they born with that DNA, because they still have it, they're now seeing other real tangible impacts. They now have to start having things like water meters that they never had before. Or when we were doing this early work, when I was up there, we were also in tabulating stuff, realized that there's a lot of folks up and down the river that are siphoning water that they shouldn't be, or more than they should be getting. And so now that we're tracking it and saying, hey, you're taking too much water, or take that straw out, now it's also real. It's not just the DNA piece. So the challenge continues, and we got to keep working it together.
I agree that the support needs to be strong in Southern California. I think that the 1982 vote was lost because the 60% wasn't 70% or more than that. And I think that the Delta political voice actually gets pretty spread pretty far and wide. They have a number of the people that are very active in the legislature regarding water. And their key thing is they need the water projects because when water is stored and released in dry years, that is exactly what they need. They need that water to flow through those Delta Island channels. During the summertime, when the quality would have been poor if they didn't have those water projects, so they need that. But they also need the levees, and they're afraid that if there's a water fix or something, that there will be no appetite to fund those levees. So their campaign and their message is very sharp, and they have they have efforts that reach into Southern California. We saw that during the time that our board was taking it up in September and October, where the campaign was actually reaching into our service area and drumming up people to come to the meetings to to speak out. It's all part of the process, though. And so the people that have an interest in preserving the delta, because right now it's not tenable, but fixing it in a way that's better for fish and better for habitat, those voices need to come out, and it needs to be, in addition to the legislators, it's got to be the opinion leaders in the local and regional areas.
Yeah, I'd ask the question, when's the last time we mobilized busloads of people to go to Sacramento? Every hearing on the Delta, from Stockton, there are busloads of people that show up at State Capitol. With T-shirts and plaque. I especially like the crowd emojis, that as you're speaking, they hold up the frowny face emojis. If you happen to speak in behalf of the Delta Fix.
Other question?
Director Friari.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. This is a fabulous presentation, honestly. We have three really, you talk about lack of leadership. I think all three of you are providing some tremendous leadership, and I congratulate you on that. I have an observation as well as a question, and I think the question is going to be for Mr. Arakawa. The observation is, and please correct me if I'm wrong, we're talking now about the referendum back in 1982, but as I recall, the original proposal by Governor Brown included a peripheral canal, and because of the political issues back in the 1960s, that was eliminated from the proposal. So this whole thing goes back really further than the 30-some-odd years that we're talking about. It's probably in California's genes at this point in time. My question is, it's really interesting, this debate between the single versus the double tunnel, the two tunnels, and I get the sense that it's mostly an economic issue in terms of getting financial support for it. I was at one kind of program or presentation where one of the discussions, or the negative discussions about the single tunnel, was that all of the environmental studies have been conducted in conjunction with the two tunnels, and that to go back to the single tunnel concept would delay the project substantially because of the necessity to redo a lot of the environmental studies. And I'd be interested in your comments on that. Why you see that as affecting affecting the decision for the single versus the double tunnel.
Yeah, and I think, there's a couple things. One is the two tunnels was configured after years and years of working with the fish agency. So they figured out how does it work with them to get it approved, what kind of operating criteria, what kind of fish benefits are we looking for. And so a lot went into developing the Cal Water Fix project, and that was the 9,000 cubic feet per second. The state is not stepping away from that. They're still looking to pursue that project. So what they came out with in early February is a staged implementation so that they don't have to start over.
Oh, okay.
They would count on the environmental document that they have. They do some supplemental environmental review, which they would do this year. But they would essentially pursue the same Cal Water Fix project, but they would do it in stages. And in their description, they say they would implement the project in a way that aligns funding with implementation. So if one tunnel gets done, it's because the state water project contractors are ready to step up and do it. And then the federal contractors or other parties would come in with their financing as part of the second stage. Certainly, the State Water Board is a key permit, and so there's an interest by the state to not have to start over again on that either, on that process, because we're already a year and a half into that process. But I think in the end, the project moving forward in some manner, whether it's stage one or you call it the full project, we're at that point where there's a need to move it forward, to organize the entities that would do the design and construction and do the financing so that by the end of 2018, there's substantial effort, action, momentum towards getting the project done.
Well, thank you. That's very helpful to know that.
Director Lazat.
I got a couple questions. Mr. Carl, Met initially come up with $4 billion, and now they're talking about an additional $6 billion. Do you think this will help the negotiations step up? Will it bring in the Central Valley farmer that backed off and maybe come back in now?
Yeah, so I think the board is just in the middle of trying to figure it out. They've asked for the staff to come back with an analysis to show what would it mean if Metropolitan stepped in to help the financing part of it for the second part of it, the second stage. And so you would have, potentially you'd have the first stage being funded by the State Water Project, and then the second stage, Metropolitan possibly could step in to do that financing, but it wouldn't be as a subsidized effort. It would be to actually move the project forward, get it done, and then recover fees or costs or rates or whatever as time goes on. As the state and the federal project have the need for the tunnel, then that repayment would come back as a way of assuring that there is no subsidy there, that the costs are being fully recovered. But the board is going to take a couple months to look at this in detail. Our Met board, they asked us at the meeting last week where we talked to them about this stage one, moving forward with stage one and what that means if the State Water Project were to do stage one. And it could be very favorable for the State Water Project to fund stage one, but in the end, the best project is doing the whole project because of the fishery benefits of the full project. And so I think the Met board and the parties that asked for the analysis are just wanting to make sure that we don't overlook an opportunity to make sure that the best, most effective project has a possibility of getting done. And I think the state's interested in seeing what the Met board looks at and makes whatever decision they make.
Thank you. I have a couple follow-up questions on this. I think I heard you say the projections would, going forward, if the project is approved, it comes out to 1% per year increase for the water rate payers. I guess my question is to our general manager, in our 10-year cash flow, did we take that into consideration?
Always.
Well,
Okay.
I mean, I can answer that even from the Santa Margarita Inn next door. We have already taken that into account because it's included in Met's projections over the next 10 years. So as they talk about the 3.5% to 4% as part of their portfolio that we're already considering, that includes waterfix. That's not an additional item on top of that.
Okay, so, but Charlie, we know that MoDOC buys the water from Met, and then we buy it from MoDOC, and they put their little piece on it. So we're in sync with that. That number works? Okay. You know, one of the other things you talked about was, and there was an article in this morning's paper on water rights and trying to be conservative. If we tell people, you know, you got to only water at certain times of the day. The article in this morning's paper addressed that issue. Yeah, some fear that fixed restrictions could erase water rights. So I guess that would be something we'd have to handle on a local level to convince these people that they don't have water rights. We're mainly talking about the big farmers up in Central Valley,
You're
right?
talking outside the area. I think that would be my admonition. As you're seeing in the paper today, we're coming into another very dry year. The state is going to do what the state does. and they will exercise the police power of the state when they think it is necessary and appropriate, and it will come from top down. This is an opportunity for a bottom-up to solve reliability problems so that you avoid future top-down regulatory mandates.
You know, the other thing you talked about was controlling the water flowing down rivers, creeks, and so forth. How do you address the environmentalist concern about not having water running down, which brings down the pebbles and the sand to replenish the beaches? Those people are they have a strong voice. They're gonna get up and start talking about that.
Absolutely, and I think, you know, part of the mantra of the opposition on the waterfix project is that the project will basically divert all the water.
Yeah.
At the same time, they say, and down here in Southern California, their campaign, their message was really, Southern Californians are going to pay a huge rate increase, but you're not going to get any more water. So they're trying to convey both ideas, that the project's not going to deliver any more water, and so it's not cost effective, or they also say that it's taking all of the water out of the delta. Like I said, the fishery agencies, both the federal and state, were involved all the way from 2006 until now, until the permits were issued, on what kind of flows are needed under the Endangered Species Act. And then the State Water Board in 2018 is expected to have a decision on the intake permits, what kind of standards are necessary to permit the project, the tunnel project. So all of that gets considered, and then the state operates the project to meet those regulations. So the agencies that are responsible for determining what's needed for environmental protection will identify what's needed, and then the project will have to comply with that.
You know, we would like to leave some time for the audience to ask some questions. Do we have anything pressing from the board? Good. Now let's open up to the audience, and I want to start off Mary Jane Foley.
Wait a minute.
Wait a minute, she's not allowed to ask questions. She knows where the delta is.
Well, your panel was wonderful. You all did a great job. I have a couple of questions. When Jose walked in, I said, Jose, can't we get the governor? We have to have this kind of resolved before the governor leaves. So can't we tell the governor, call over the State Water Board, tell him to do the water rights hearing, get it over with? Because he can do that. He didn't have ex parte. Those are his people. He can do that. And but the thing, I like what you just said about Steve, about the fact that when you said that we're going to have to do a supplemental EIR, I thought, oh my God, that's going to take so long. I liked hearing that they won't have, it won't be a long due process. But is there a possibility that the Water Board could do their water rights decision before Brown leaves at the pace you see things going, or is it lost?
Well, the schedule is for them to have a decision by the end of 2018. That's what the state has been looking for. Obviously, the State Water Board members themselves, as you know, they're appointed and they're staggered, and they have a certain amount of responsibility with those positions. The governor, I think the governor and his staff have been coordinating with all different agencies on the timetable for this project. So I don't think it's a secret. And that's why it was so important to not lose any time to have to start over and say, oh, this is a new project. It's not a new project. It's the same project. And for the State Water Board to start on their second part of their proceedings. The first part was on impacts to other water right holders. The second part is on fish and wildlife. And so they're scheduled to start this month, today actually, and to have a decision by the end of 2018. We'll have to see if that happens, but that's what the timetable is.
I just want to make a comment, and especially to you, Charlie, because you're such a great advocate. When I was on the State Water Board, we had 3 members from Southern California. It makes a hell of a difference to have people from Southern California making these big decisions that affect Southern California. Right now, there's nobody from Southern California.
Do I hear you nominating Jose Solario for State Water Board?
Yes, yes, he was on the regional board. Perfect.
I'm gonna nominate you, Joe.
But, you know, I mean, that's just another little thing that goes unnoticed, but it's important.
Well, your point is well taken, and I think that's part of our next phase with whoever the next governor is. We certainly need to continue to have water an issue, and diversification across the state's an important element.
And I have one quick, we don't get any more allocation with all of this, though, do we? We haven't, it doesn't increase our contract.
Okay, so no, the contract would be the same contract, but when we brought the analysis to our board, we showed what would we be facing if we made no investment. And we projected the kind of restrictions that the fish agencies have been considering for years, and in fact, some of the same ones that they've included in the Cal WaterFix operating criteria. If we had no new intakes, that would reduce our water supply about 350,000 acre feet just in the next 10 or 15 years. So there was definitely a business case that we brought to our board that the cost spread out into that amount of water that we potentially lose is favorable compared to any other option that we have. And so that was a part of their decision-making process.
Hey, Howard Rivera.
Thank you. Stephen, I like to plan ahead. So can you please give me the best-case scenario time-wise on step one, stage one, when it could be completed if everything did as it should and it goes right?
Yeah, I think that the project was planned to start, the real heavy construction probably start in 2019 or 2020. There's a lot of preliminary work, including land acquisition and geotechnical work, engineering work that would take place leading up to the real construction work, and then the design that goes along with that. So let's say 2020, and then that would stretch out to about 2031. So it's a very complex project, and with a staging approach, all you're talking about is instead of boring 2 tunnels side by side, you do 1. So I would say that the schedule is kind of in the same ballpark. I don't have the precise schedule of whether you're able to shave a year or 2 off of it, but I would say that you're talking about a time schedule that's at least 11 or 12 years to complete the project. You're talking about 30 miles, tunnel boring. It's an area, though, that is not as challenging as other like rock formations and mountains. So there's a belief that with the right geotechnical engineering, with the the borings that you do in the ground to see what kind of material, that you can really plan well to understand what's necessary. But yeah, planning ahead, we probably should have done this project quite a while ago. But it would take about 12, 13 years to do the construction portion of the project. And in the meantime, I think there's a lot of other efforts that could be pursued, including continuing to implement our emergency response plan in the Delta if there is an earthquake. Not to just rely on the tunnel, but if we have an earthquake and we're counting on the Delta levees, what's the response plan? So we're doing that too.
I'd like to thank the board, the panel, for being here. And Charlie, are you going to run any ads on this to support our educating advocacy?
Part of the campaign that we have engaged in we began this in August. It is a supplemental education campaign we've been running since August, and predominantly we are doing paid ads around social media. It is not because that's the cheapest, most targeted and effective advertising that we can do. So as an example, because going into the original metropolitan vote, because of the importance within the LA city community in bringing awareness there, we targeted Los Angeles City rather than, say, San Bernardino or Orange County, where we already knew there was general support. So that's kind of how we're going about it. Now, we are currently funded through April, The question will be, you know, what happens in April with the metropolitan vote? Is there another phase to this, and what does that phase look like? I'm in the planning stages with my folks right now to take a good hard look at that.
Thank you, and I would support you for governor.
We had a Governor Wilson.
And now, I think the final question that we'll have from the panel, Councilwoman.
All right, Councilwoman Janine Heff, Laguna Hills. This is a little bit off the immediate subject, but it's something that's really stuck in my craw and bugged me for a while. I heard that with the onslaught, all the rain we received, Oroville, all that a few years ago, that you mentioned this, the storage reserves, we just don't have them, so we've effectively wasted water that we could have had. It seems like with this $17 billion project, it's a huge stretch as far as resources are concerned. What is the practicality behind our inability not to build storage reserves to be able to be on top of the game when we have enough rain? I mean, you mentioned bad plumbing. Why aren't we doing that?
Well, we are. There are some, in fact, and Steve can talk to what's happening. There's a couple of storage projects in the northern part of the state that are under review. In fact, you've seen it in the newspapers of late because the Water Commission is looking at Prop 1 funding for those things, and there's some issues there. Those are also big public works projects. There is some capacity in Southern California. I mean, Metropolitan, and I don't want to speak for Steve, billions and billions of dollars have gone into additional storage. That's why we have Diamond Valley Lake. That's why we didn't run out of water in the last drought, because of their foresight, because of their planning 20, 25 years in advance. And that takes time, and it's there, and it's needed, so that as climate change continues, if in fact is this gulp sip approach, and that's really what this thing is about. This is an insurance plan. This is about the ability to move water when it's available and still have water to flow through for protection and for the enhancement of the environment. But you gotta have a place to put it.
Right.
And you can't, and it doesn't make any sense to build 2 reservoirs north of the delta if you can't move the water. So it's a chicken and egg syndrome, but you gotta do all of the above. We have to address this thing in a really smart, practical, cost-efficient manner. This is a huge piece of it. It by no means is a silver bullet.
But what you're saying is that measures are being done, plans are happening to actually not have a situation where we lose all that water. So we are learning from our past mistakes.
We are learning from past mistakes. There's lots of work going on around groundwater recharge and other groundwater basins which have some really severe problems, particularly in the Central Valley. And I'd like to seize the opportunity. As a councilwoman, the California League of Cities, ACCOC has been very supportive, but the California League of Cities needs to step up, and it's the Southern California League members that need to drive this through the state league. They have not taken a position. They will not take a position because there's not been the cry from people in the South that we got to have this.
That's interesting because I'm on the board of directors for the ACCOC, and we're about to do an advocacy trip to Sacramento with the League of Cities, so that'll be very interesting.
Would suggest you add this to your agenda.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you.
Good morning, and thanks again. Very insightful. You know, we talked about the Northern California Legislative Caucus that's against this, the DNA-infused population against this in Northern California. Who are the other major players against this project?
Well, there's environmental groups, environmental interests, NGOs. There's a small number that are more open to the project if it's done properly. Those entities, those environmental groups tend to be involved in habitat restoration, on-the-ground improvements, probably similar to the same kind of groups that you all work with down here in this area for habitat conservation plans. Similar types of groups up in the Delta area. There are other environmental groups that are larger, and they strongly oppose the project. So the Delta leadership, the people in the Delta have been opponents. The environmental interest groups, the big ones, particularly those that really, a lot of their activity is lawsuits to try to assure that the environment is being protected. So a lot of those types of groups. And I would say that's probably primarily where the opposition is coming from.
And I would add too, there are some folks that support the project, they just don't want to pay for it. So really a big part of the dynamic in the Central Valley is they know they'll benefit, but right now they get very cheap water.
You're talking about farmers.
Folks in, yes, Central Valley, including farmers. And so they like cheap water and they don't mind, because some of them look at short-term interest, they don't mind that there's subsidence, they don't mind that, you know, an earthquake could happen and it can all fall apart. And, you know, you have in the Central Valley a big difference between big ag and small ag, and they all have different factors as to how they make a decision on whether they move forward on a project like this. And sometimes they think, let Southern California pay for it, let the state figure it out. Or even on the storage, sometimes they don't want to pay their full share to build the dam. They want a statewide subsidy, and so you got some of those dynamics as well.
Charlie's chomping at the bit to
The
say
largest
something.
water users in the state is the water company. We've all seen the ads, either Palm One this over there, other agricultural projects. What's the position of Linda and Stewart, Resnick, on the project?
Yeah, I don't know that I could talk to what their position is. I know that Kern County Water Agency is the agency that provides water to the areas that, you know, that they grow. And so they're in a process right now to talk with their member units. So some of their member units are those that support Wonderful in their farming activities. The state water project contractors are pursuing a cost allocation for the project based on our state project contracts. So that's different than on the federal side where you had Westlands Water District saying, we don't want to invest in this project. That was something that came out last year. But the state water project contractors are looking to do allocate the cost based on the contract, and then be able to do water transfers between contractors to help manage costs and supply between contractors to make it, you know, affordable for those that maybe have a more difficult time. But I don't really want to say what the Resnick position is, because that's kind of beyond kind of my involvement and, you know, kind of where they are. But Kern County Water Agency's president has been very supportive of moving Cal WaterFix along, the board president, so that's been very helpful as well.
And as you see, this discussion could go on for hours and hours and hours, but I think we're going to end it at this time. I'll tell you what, it's been an outstanding discussion, and it's all because of the involvement from everyone here with the Molten Nagel Citizens Advisory Council. We want to thank you for participating today. And as we learned that water infrastructure, it takes years and years and years to install. And so what we need to do now is make sure that we move before there's a crisis. And with that, it's educate and advocate. And I think you've all gotten your call to action on that one as we move forward. So we're real lucky here to have leaders like Steve and Jose and Charlie who have the long-term view of water planning. And so that's been very, very helpful for us today. I want to thank you, the three of you, for being our panelists today. They did an outstanding job. Let's give them a hand. And without further ado, I'm going to ask Director Fiore to hit the gavel, and we will be adjourned. Thank you very much for being here.